Hey everyone, Brad Browning here, and welcome to my brand new marriage advice channel. And today I'm going to talk about how to save your marriage even if your partner says that they want a divorce. Now, this is clearly going to be a topic that I'll be spending a lot of time on, so I'll do my best to cover all the major points that I think that all marriages need to address. So make sure you watch this entire video because in it, I'm going to try and cover some hidden tips and tricks that most couples will never know about sustaining a happy and fruitful marriage, even if things seem dire right now. And these tips and tricks have been proven to help you, even if your husband or wife has said they're no longer happy in the marriage and they want a divorce. Even if they've said some painful and hurtful things like, "I just don't love you anymore," or "I'm leaving you." Or maybe they've already left you. But no matter how bad the situation is, there are some proven ways that you can resuscitate some life into your marriage, even if your spouse is adamant on ending things. Now, I know this because I've seen thousands and thousands of marriages that have turned it around, and I know the exact scientific principles at play that make this a reality. Now, that being said, rebuilding a broken marriage can be extremely difficult, and sometimes they can get even worse before they improve. But I can guarantee you that if you stick to the guidance in this video, you'll have the best possible chance of making your spouse re-love you again, and you'll be able to build the marriage that you've always dreamed of. But before I get into what to do in a marriage, let me start off by telling you the mistakes that you absolutely need to avoid right now. Before you can really improve your marriage, you have to make sure that your marriage isn't getting any worse. Now, I call these critical errors my big marital mistakes. After years of coaching thousands of married couples, I've noticed that these mistakes are commonly committed amongst the worst marriages. Now, some of these tips might seem obvious, but it's important to make a conscious note of them so that you don't continue down the road of further damaging your marriage. Addressing these mistakes will even have an immediate positive impact on your marriage as well. So let's jump right into it. The first big marital mistake is being highly emotional. And this is especially true if you're being highly emotional in public. Not only do these emotional outbursts ruin your spouse's image of you, but during these outbursts, people tend to say and do things that they later regret. So I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about here. We've all done and said things that we've later regretted, but it's usually due to the fact that we let emotions get the better of us. And sometimes these emotions can feel like they're impossible to control. Inevitably, your spouse is going to say or do something that will make you feel angry, upset, or deeply saddened. And while these emotions are an indicator that something in your marriage needs to change, how you deal with these emotions will be paramount in addressing the underlying problems of your marriage. So for now, the moment you feel like screaming at your spouse for something that he or she did wrong, do your best to control this outburst as much as possible. Try having a coping mechanism every time you feel like you're about to have an outburst. For example, for me, every single time that I feel like I'm getting overly upset, I try to take 3 deep and silent breaths. I find that breathing deeply helps me to relax and forces me to consciously control my emotions. Doing so will help you have more productive arguments, which is something that I'll get into a little bit later in this video. Now, the second big marital mistake, number 2, is initiating needless conflicts with your spouse. So when you're trying to recover from a rough patch in your marriage and you feel like your back is against the wall, things can spiral really quickly. Right now you think that just talking with your spouse will solve all your problems. But usually, to be honest, that isn't the case. While communication is obviously one of the most important things when it comes to rebuilding your marriage, what your marriage does not need right now is another catastrophic argument or fight. Even if your partner does or says something to antagonize you, do your absolute best to avoid the conflict politely. Now, do not ignore your spouse or belittle their concerns, obviously, because otherwise you'll make matters worse. But you really just need to ensure that your interaction does not end in a screaming match. You can even say something like, "I know you feel like this is a concern right now, and I want to resolve it as much as you do, but can we discuss this later?" Try and be as non-confrontational as possible for now until you have a better framework to handle your arguments. Now, I'll get to something that I like to call my dispute diffusing system later in this video, and it's the very best way to have a polite and productive argument with your spouse. But first, let's talk about big marital mistake number 3, which is making drastic changes to your life or your habits. Now, I know what it feels like to be caught in a rut. It can feel like nothing in your life is going right, and the harder you try to dig yourself out, the more helpless you feel. And the worse it gets, the more likely it is to negatively affect other areas of your life, like your work, your school, your health, your sleep, and your nutrition. But the more you flounder in these areas, the worse it will get for you. And this will in turn place added pressure on your marriage. So do your best to make sure you're continuing to live a balanced lifestyle. Don't force any massive change into your life. For now, concentrate on making sure your ducks are in order, because the more in order your life is, the easier it'll be for you to tackle the problems that are plaguing your relationship. Now, the fourth big marital mistake is nagging at your spouse. So similar to number 2, you want to try and avoid any possible source of pointless conflict. When things are going poorly with your spouse, it's easy to get annoyed at them. But the thing is, starting these small confrontations can be the impetus for larger arguments. And that's the last thing that you need right now. So again, the next time you feel like you're about to nag at your spouse for something, try and hold it in. You'll be thanking yourself later for this. And finally, big marital mistake number 5, being negative all the time. Now, I know that it can be almost impossible right now, especially when you feel like the world is crashing in all around you. But having a positive attitude can make a world of difference, not only in your marriage, but in life in general. It's actually scientifically proven that thinking positive can reduce stress, depression, and better equip you to cope with hardships down the road. Not only this, but your spouse isn't going to want to spend time with a negative Nancy, if you will. People are hardwired to be more attracted to positive people, and understandably so, right? And keep in mind, your spouse probably isn't feeling too great about this situation either, so don't add to their negativity. Of course, I know this is easier said than done. During a really difficult marriage, it can be easy to lose hope and dwell on negative aspects of your life. But don't let this happen. Instead, focus more time and energy on the remaining positive aspects of your life, whether it be your health, your children, your work, or your hobbies. In turn, doing so will prevent your marriage from incurring more damage and stress. And I promise you, staying positive will be one of the most powerful things that you can do right now. Remember, every single marriage has its ups and downs. But the best marriages I've seen always seem to remain positive, even during the rockiest of moments. Now, of course, this isn't a complete list of mistakes that you might be committing in your marriage. So if you want to learn more marriage-ending mistakes, just head over to marriageguy.com and watch the free video guide on my website. Again, the URL is marriageguy.com. Now that we've briefly covered some of the most common mistakes, let's begin talking about the things that you can do to fix your marriage. Again, this is a huge topic and I won't be able to cover everything, but if you do have any questions at all, then please feel free to drop them in the comments section below and I will do my very best to get back to you. Although there are a ton of different strategies that you can employ to fix your marriage, there are some key pointers that almost every couple needs. For example, arguments are inevitable, even in a healthy relationship. If you don't know how to disagree properly or engage in good faith conversations, a lot of these disagreements can devolve into full-blown MMAs, or what I like to call marriage-murdering arguments. Now, MMAs can do some long-lasting damage to your marriage, so it's best to practice avoiding this as much as possible. Sometimes MMAs, aren't always preventable, so in those situations, it's also important to learn how you can handle these arguments when they rear their ugly faces. And this, of course, is where my patented dispute diffusing system comes into play. Now, my system isn't about preventing arguments entirely. It's more about how to deal with arguments more effectively. Remember, arguments are healthy even in the best of marriages. You're never going to be able to eliminate all disagreements. In fact, the occasional disagreement can actually improve your marriage depending on how it's handled. And it can even pull both of you closer together. So in this part of the video, I'm going to talk about some of the best ways to handle arguments using my dispute diffusing system. Now, my first dispute diffusing tactic is to let go of the desire to always be right. I know you probably think that you're always right. I totally get it. I feel like I'm the same way too sometimes. But people have this obsession of always trying to win the argument no matter the cost. And this can end up being totally toxic and destructive in a marriage. Letting go of this constant desire to always be right is the very first step of my system. So when you and your partner are in a marriage murdering argument, there really are no winners if you really think about it. You both lose because neither of you are ever going to admit defeat, and the feelings will just get hurt in the process. So even if you feel like you've won the argument, the satisfaction is going to be totally replaced by the repercussions of you hurting your partner. So as hard as it is, do your best to not care about winning the battle. Instead, argue in good faith. The goal of a disagreement is to uncover the truth, no matter who's right or wrong, and come up with a solution to your problem. Those are the only goals that you should have in mind when you're arguing with your spouse. If you're having issues letting go of the desire to always be right, do your best just to bite your tongue. Or if you're feeling bold, tell your spouse that they're right if the situation prevents itself. Once you start practicing this, it'll go a long way in preventing MMAs in the future, and you'll quickly improve the relationship that you have with your spouse. Now, the second dispute diffusing tactic is to take short breaks from arguments. So when you're in the middle of a massive argument, emotions can run rampant. And if left unabated, these emotions can turn your dispute into a full-blown marriage-murdering argument. So to counteract this, one of the best tactics that you can employ is to take breaks during your argument. Now, you can do this by simply letting your partner know that you need a quick breather. Now, do not simply start ignoring your partner and take a break. Trust me when I say that ignoring your spouse entirely will make the situation 10 times worse. Instead, you have to let your partner know that you're getting upset and that you need a moment to burn off some steam. Now, this tactic counteracts one of the most commonly held beliefs. Have you ever heard of the saying that you should never go to bed angry? Well, I'm here to tell you that that piece of advice can be dead wrong. Depending on the situation, going to bed and taking a break from the entire argument is actually usually the best course of action. Because honestly, usually the next morning after, you'll be willing to enter the argument with calmer nerves and a more rational mindset. And sometimes you'll suddenly realize that the argument you were having the night before wasn't such a big deal to begin with. All right, and dispute diffusing tip number 3 is to learn to conduct your arguments with more respect. So to some this might seem obvious, and it should be, but when emotions get out of hand, we have a greater tendency to say things that we later regret. Name-calling, put-downs, and pointless insults are obviously bad, and there are always ways to articulate arguments in a way that don't offend your partner. But there are less obvious ways to convey your points with more respect. For example, you can start using the word I instead of you during an argument. So instead of always saying, "You always leave your dirty socks on the floor," you could say something like, "I think it would help if we just took care of our laundry better." And just by changing a few words, you can change the entire complexion of the conversation. By making these little changes here and there, not only will your spouse be more receptive to your requests, but don't be surprised if your spouse starts treating you with more respect in turn. Now, dispute diffusing tactic number 4 is to use well-timed humor during your argument. Now, you're going to have to be extra careful with this one, but if you do it right, injecting some well-thought-out humor can de-escalate potential arguments quite well. So let's use the previous tip as an example. Instead of saying, "You're always leaving dirty socks on the floor," you could say something like, "The stench of your dirty socks could kill a moose." Okay, maybe that wasn't the best joke, but I'm sure you can sniff at what I'm getting at, Anyways, these are just a few tactics that I have in my dispute diffusing system. If you want to learn more about it, you can head over to my website.